Hi, Landry Etheridge here with Etheridge Counseling Group, here to talk about how to decide between couples counseling and individual counseling. It can be a hard decision. I have often had clients reach out for couples counseling when maybe individual is going to be more helpful. And a lot of times people reach out for individual counseling when I really encourage them, hey, might be a better suited for couples counseling. So how do you make that decision? How do you know what to do? Well, first of all, couples counseling tends to focus more on, communication, relationship dynamics. Obviously, if you're having some sexual concerns, couples counseling is going to be really great for that. Individual, you're going to tend to focus on the individual, right? You're going to be focusing on your personal feelings, thoughts, behaviors, thought patterns, behavioral patterns. If there's any addiction going on, that's usually better suited for individual. So some common reasons that people might go to couples counseling would be for obviously any type of relational. So my kind of rule of thumb is you want to have as many people in the room as you can. So if it truly is just an individual problem, it's going to be just you. But if there's any concerns about the relationship, let's get the relationship in the room. So for couples counseling, it's sort of an interesting thing here. The client is considered the couple. The couple is the client. So you still have one client, and that client is the couple. So the relationship is the client. So a therapist isn't going to be necessarily, isn't picking sides. Their goal is to improve the relationship. And so that can kind of look, different ways. But for an individual, then the therapist is most concerned with that individual, not as much with their relationships. So if there's an issue in the relationship at all, it's best to have that relationship in the room. So obviously relationship issues, communication, if there's any type of infidelity, whether it's like an emotional affair or a sexual affair, or any type of affair, that is typically, you're definitely going to do couples therapy for that. Either to decide, even if you're sort of deciding how you feel about continuing in that relationship, it still can be really helpful to do couples therapy and make that a dialogue. So you're either deepening your relationship, and repairing that relationship in couples therapy, or you might be working through, moving into parting ways. So another reason I think it's really important to do couples therapy is in any type of life transition. So whether that's moving from dating to engaged or engaged to married, in those types of big shifts, definitely encourage everyone to do premarital counseling. Really interesting statistic there that I have on the website if you want to read about how much premarital counseling can affect your relationship 1, 2, 3, many years down the road. So highly recommend doing premarital counseling. Even pre-engagement counseling can be really, really important because you're going to go ahead and get on the same page with a whole lot of things that tend to be conflicts down the road. So if you can go ahead and nip all of that in the bud, really, really encourage people to do that. But any type of life transition, so maybe having children, or maybe one of the partners has been diagnosed with an illness that's going to affect the relationship, entering retirement, empty nesters, getting maybe a terminal illness diagnosis, any sort of big shift, moving to a new city, one partner losing their job, any of those big sort of life transitions really can be helpful to do couples counseling at that point, at that junction. And I really encourage couples to go to couples counseling, even if things are going really well, because you want that to continue. Statistically speaking, couples wait 7 years to start couples counseling when the issue began 7 years prior. That is scary. that is scary. You, at that point, you have these entrenched patterns in your relationship that are so much harder to get out of 7 years down the road. So if things are going really well, it can be great to go ahead and start doing counseling there to deepen your connection even more, improve your communication even more, get these patterns of connection really strong in your relationship so that it lasts the long haul. Now, here's some reasons you might want to actually move into personal. So if you, I think if you personally have unresolved trauma, I think it can be really important to do individual, maybe even in conjunction, because our trauma absolutely affects our relationship, and our partner can help. Ideally, both partners are helping each other heal from that trauma in the context of relationships. So even if only one partner has trauma, it can still really be important to do couples counseling so that both of you know when that trauma is triggered, or when those negative patterns from childhood or negative childhood beliefs are triggered, and how to handle that within the context of the relationship. But also to have some space where you can do your own processing and healing of those traumatic events or memories, or maybe it's not like a big T trauma, but maybe it's more like some emotional neglect perhaps in childhood that gets triggered. And when I say emotional neglect, I'm talking about maybe attachment style. So if you're avoidant attachment, you can do some good individual work with that. Anxious attachment, some good individual work with that in individual, and working on that communication in couples counseling. But if you're really interested in doing personal self-improvement or self-growth, I think that could be really good for individual. Also, if you have any confidentiality concerns, so if you maybe aren't ready to talk about something with your partner, then individual might be a good place for you to process your thoughts on that or make a decision on how to handle that. Because when you're in couples counseling, there aren't any secrets kept. So a therapist in couples counseling, or a good therapist in couples counseling, a good couples therapist isn't going to keep secrets for one partner. Everything's kind of on the table. So if you have any confidentiality concerns, you're definitely going to want to do your individual counseling. Because once you're in couples counseling, it's the couple is the client, not the individual. So there aren't any secret keeping going on there, because it doesn't work. It won't work otherwise. If you are really on the fence whether you are wanting to stay in this relationship, maybe it's a dating relationship, you're not really sure how you're feeling about it, I think individual can be really important there. Couples counseling is only going to get you so far if you aren't committed to the relationship. There needs to be some level of commitment to that relationship for it to improve. If you're on the fence, there's not much for the therapist to work on there. So getting some clarity can sometimes be helpful in individual first. Also, if you are needing some personal accountability, maybe you're in a relationship, but you kind of need some personal accountability. Maybe there's some sort of addiction pattern there, or any other type of needing to kind of like wanting to hold yourself accountable there, that can be really helpful. But also a lot of times if there's some complex issues, doing individual and couples can be really important. Now, I will say, if you do that, I recommend that you do that sort of in one private practice, because it can be really helpful for your couples therapist to be communicating with your individual therapist. I have seen this happen, unfortunately, where the individual therapist and the couples therapist were not communicating. And unfortunately, those therapists then had separate goals that were at odds with each other. And that can really mess up the work that you're doing in that other setting. So what I recommend is either having a couples therapist and individual therapist that are willing to talk to each other, or maybe in the same private practice, so that they're going to naturally be able to talk to each other there anyway, and make sure that their goals are not in opposition and going to cause bigger problems. trauma, anytime trauma is involved, I think individual and couples therapy is going to be helpful, because you want to work on the individual stuff, you want to heal the trauma, but you also need to, the couple dynamics needs to kind of know how to handle when trauma, when, you know, stuff, when that old stuff is triggered, how to go about that so it doesn't re-traumatize or exacerbate, you know, what's going on there. Yeah. So think about what your primary issue, what the primary issue is. If it's a relationship, if there's conflict in the relationship, there's an interesting statistic there as well. If you focus on the problems of a relationship without in individual therapy. So if you're doing individual, it's you and your therapist, but you're talking about your external relationship with your partner, it is shown to harm the relationship more than help it. So if you have a relationship concern, it is best not to address that in individual, because research shows that it harms the relationship. It actually gets worse. That's because you need both parties present in order to create change and create improvement. So what you don't want to do is go to your individual therapist and get advice on how to improve relationship issues. That is, statistically speaking, going to harm your relationship, even if you're going to get advice. So don't get relationship advice from your individual therapist, generally. Of course, they can kind of speak to general things like, you know, assertiveness skills or some sort of general communication information, but you don't want to get kind of into the details, because it'll usually backfires. So what's the primary issue? Are both parties willing to invest in the relationship? So sometimes there's one partner who's like, I'm not interested in doing couples counseling, in which case your best bet is going to be to do some individual, to kind of like work through even that maybe there's some sadness that my partner isn't willing to go to therapy for this thing. Or what are your goals? Do you need a safe place to just explore your own personal issues? So yeah, a lot to think through with that. But you can also, if you already have an individual therapist and you're thinking of couples therapy, talk to them and get their advice. And if you're already in couples counseling, ask your therapist if you think, is there anything that I need to work on separately? A lot of the time the answer is no. Couples, you want to work on the relationship. But sometimes there might be like, yeah, I think it could be helpful to also be doing some of your own personal work within yourself over here. So a little bit more about that on the blog. What is the blog titled? So you can actually find it on the website. It's called How to Decide Between Individual Therapy and Couples Therapy in Charleston, South Carolina. So you can look that up on our website, LandryEtheridge.com. And feel free to reach out and schedule a free consultation with me. If you are kind of on the fence about what might be best, I can kind of help advise you or steer you in one direction or the other, kind of help you think through what might be best for where I am at this point. So you can also schedule those free consultations on the website, LandryEtheridge.com.